this is, I got this great slide from the Onion. Nabisco introduces extreme salt assault saltines. That's what many of my patients crave. And if many of my older patients, not necessarily with cystinuria, saw this stuff on the shelf, they would buy boxes and boxes of it. Oh, salt. Fantastic. We all crave salt, and there's very little that we can do to get away from it. But if you successfully reduce your salt intake, then it takes a couple of weeks. There's changes in your taste buds that occur are well documented. There are those little channels that are in the kidney are also in those taste buds. And a little bit of time passes, and suddenly everything starts tasting salty to you. And you realize that in this society, all of the processed food, all of the deli meats, all of the canned foods, all the soups that you get in every restaurant is just loading you with salt. It's very difficult to resist this. The average New Yorker has around 200 milliequivalents of salt. That's about 5 grams, as I'll show you. So we want to cut down salt intake in order to cut down cysteine excretion. This is another graph that John generated here, and it shows very similar to the animal protein intake. This is the amount of sodium in the urine, and 200 is a kind of what I think of as an average amount of salt. But you can see that there were people in this study who had 300 or even up to 400 millimoles of sodium. As sodium increases, the amount of cysteine in the urine continued to increase as well. So there's a strong relationship. Although this has been shown before, they're not shown in as many people as this, that this relationship is as strong. So the goal is to cut this down, if possible, to about 100 milliequivalents of sodium. That's about 2 grams of sodium. You multiply that by about 2.5 to get the grams of sodium chloride, the grams of salt. You get about 5 grams of salt would be the goal of reduction. And that's about a teaspoon of sodium chloride, which is very, very salty. So then we want to take the cysteine and change it into cysteine. And the drugs that do that are the cysteine-binding thiol drugs. And I'll show you that in a second. This is some cysteine stones, and this is the one that I particularly like. There, that's a hollow stone. And that's because this patient of mine had a stent in place and formed a stone crystallized around the stent. The stent was in for about a month, and he formed that thing, and when they pulled the stent out, that came out in his urine. So it's kind of amazing, showing how insoluble cysteine was in a relatively short period of time to form that painful but lovely thing. So we'll talk about a little bit about the thiol drugs. So we want to change the cysteine into cysteine. So I showed you on the top, there's a molecule of cysteine bound by that sulfhydryl group. We want to break that sulfur bridge and turn it into 2 molecules of cysteine. And the drugs that do that, thiola, which many of you are familiar with, and D-penicillamine. Both of them have a sulfur group at the end, a sulfur molecule at the end. And so both of them can take that sulfur, put it into the middle of a molecule of cysteine, and form a drug cysteine complex. So that's what we need. And the other thing that I've left off here is captopril. Captopril is an ACE inhibitor. It's a drug that's also used for blood pressure, but it's used for cystinuria because, like penicillamine and thiola, it also has a sulfur molecule at its end and can get into that bridge, break that bridge, and form a drug cysteine complex, form a soluble complex from something that's insoluble. So here's what, if you took that molecule of cysteine, combined it with penicillamine, then you'd have a penicillamine cysteine complex, a molecule with cysteine at one end and the penicillamine at the other. So that's the idea, going to make the cysteine soluble. And this is a slide from a paper that just came out that John and I worked on with Danielle Dolan, as a urologist here at St. Vincent's. And we basically took people, and many of you know who you are on this slide. This guy, he's here. And we basically took people and studied their cysteine capacity. John will say a little bit more about that, but the more negative the cysteine capacity, the more likely it is that the cysteine is going to precipitate. So down at this end, that's bad. The less negative, more positive results, that's good. We took people and studied them without drug, without thiola or penicillamine, then repeated the studies, again, taking the drug in order to demonstrate how much of a change in cysteine capacity would occur on drug. And basically, how many people on the 7 people on here? I think we actually have 8 when we finish this. All 8 people except for 1 had a significant increase in cysteine capacity. It became more positive. In other words, went in the right direction in the presence of drug. Now, we may not have enough patients to say this completely accurately, but it's true that the more negative, the more bad the urine was with respect to cysteine precipitation, the larger the effect. So the people at the top were not did not have as much cysteine in their urine. Those people had a relatively small effect. The people who had the more negative results had a greater effect. So it's possible that using a tool like this, measuring cysteine capacity, which John will talk about more, we could predict which patients would benefit the most or how much of the drug should be used. What I really want to tell you is the drugs work. They're effective, and they increase cysteine capacity, which is a good thing. The adverse reactions, people always ask about this. I know that all of you talk about this, and these are drugs that sort of have a reputation for being poorly tolerated. Now, according to Mission, Dan Crawford, who works at Mission, sent me some slides, which I appreciate, and some interesting data. And according to Mission, and I don't know if you agree with this, they said that people who had taken penicillamine previously were more likely to have adverse effects from thiola. And I don't think that's my experience at all. Do you think so? Were you familiar with that, Paul?
I think you're right.
Yeah, I wasn't sure that was the case, but that was some data that Mission sent me. But this is their comparison of D-penicillamine to thiola. I think that many of you would think that thiola is probably better tolerated and has fewer side effects than D-penicillamine. What I'm impressed by is that I've been able to write a lot of prescriptions for thiola and not have as many problems as some of this literature suggests. So if you read the literature, you have the idea that as many of a quarter or a third of people can't take these drugs. And there are a lot of patients that I've written prescriptions for without having problems. We've also desensitized people successfully, put them on very, very low doses at the beginning, and worked them up gradually. And we have people taking some substantial doses of both thiola and D-penicillamine. So I know that the side effects are a problem. The good news is that most of the side effects are relatively short in duration. Things like rash and fever sometimes go away. And many people who have also had those kinds of allergic manifestations, eventually they can resolve. Impaired taste is something that I have seen a couple of cases of, and people that doesn't seem to get much better with time. And then the sort of skin changes that occur, we've seen in people taking the drugs for long periods of time, usually in 25 or 30 years, and those changes are mostly cosmetic, not very serious. And I won't tell you whether that's something that you think is worthwhile, in other words, something that is avoidable or not, or worth preventing or not. Next slide. I think that's it, yeah. So that's kind of a very wide, broad overview of kidney function, of cystinuria, of management, and I could certainly take some questions, but I also think that we can take a lot more questions after Dr. Goodyear and Dr. Asplund do their thing. So thank you.